So thank you very much for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to present a German perspective on a new European reform procedure. So that is the matter I'm going to talk about. Institutional reforms in the context of the Future of Europe conference, the German perspective. Well, I hesitated for a minute to accept the challenge linked to this issue, and I would like to explain you why. There are two reasons. The first reason is, as you all know, ladies and gentlemen, there is one golden rule of good behavior among people, and that rule says, if you want to make friends with someone, don't talk about money and don't talk about politics. But that is exactly what I'm about to do in the upcoming 20 minutes. And I will also talk about law, of course. But the second concern lies in the matter itself, because I wondered what the German perspective could be. Of course, I'm a German legal scholar and I have my own views on that matter, but that isn't the question, and that would be too interesting to you. So what could the German perspective be? In Germany, we have two key actors in European politics. The first one being our federal government, and the second one being our federal constitutional court. And those two key actors are partly and sometimes at odds. But I would say the stronger political actor, and yes, political actor on that field, is our constitutional court. So, from this assumption, I will explain the steps of my presentation. First, the history of the Conference of the Future of Europe. Well, I will go very briefly over that due to my time restrictions. Well, there is one capital crime, capital conference crime, that is to bore the audience, and I don't want to bore you with history stuff. And the interesting thing will be to look at the results of the conference and then to look at the meaning of these results. And in the last step, we will have a weighting of the results, and that is the German perspective as it is, as it can be, could be outset by our constitutional court. And we heard yesterday something about the adjudication of the German Constitutional Court regarding European integration. So I will not go too deep into that. But I will repeat, and I excuse me for that, I will repeat some things we have already heard yesterday. So first, the history of the conference. At the beginning of this conference is an opinion piece of President Macron of France. He formulated some ideas of how to reform the European Union, how to advance the Maastricht Treaty after almost 30 years of this treaty being into function. And one result of Macron's ideas was the initiative for a conference of which task it was to ask the people of Europe about their ideas of reforming the European Union. And the initiative to that conference came from the presidents of the EU Commission, of the EU Council, and of the EU Parliament. And this conference started in 2021 and ended in 2022. So let's now have a brief look on the results of that conference. Well, there are no legal results in the strict sense of the word, but there is a declaration of intent which has also been drafted by the EU Commission and by the Parliament and by the EU Council. And this declaration of intent sums up the crucial points, the crucial results of this informal discussion, reform discussion among the people of Europe. And the crucial points are, first, the EU Commission found out that the people of Europe want a stronger financial federalization of the European Union. That includes joint public borrowing, and that includes, and that's very important, especially for the rich states, that includes the abolition of the principle of anonymity in budgetary policy. So today we have in wide fields of budgetary policy, we have a principle of anonymity. So those states who are up to spend money on Euro politics have to consent on that. So the second point is, as a result of the COVID crisis, there seems to be a desire to establish a stronger and a general EU competence in health policy. Then third, that is a thing coming from the first decades of European integration, the creation of a supranational democracy. Maybe we will see in our discussion what that could mean, supranational democracy. But to be a little more substantive on that, the Commission suggested as first steps to create transnational electoral lists and transnational party tickets, and in the first line to strengthen the European Citizens Initiative, which has already a legal basis in the Treaty of the European Union. This is Article 10 of that treaty. And yes, all that would mean in the long run that we have a need for treaty amendments, according to Article 48, Treaty of the European Union, because the new instruments suggested here will have to be implemented on a legal basis, and we can assume that this will not be possible only in using secondary legislation of the European Union. So what do the results mean? I chose a statement of a former Greek Secretary of State, Evangelos Venizelos, and Mr. Venizelos said, or asked the question, why do we need a simulated convention with no legal basis? Well, this question is underlined by theory, the theory that this convention has no legal basis, and that is right in the strict sense of the word. And that is why the conference on the future of Europe has no direct legal effects. And there is particularly no conference mandate to amend the existing union's treaties. So we can ask, what are the results of that conference? Are there any practical results, or is it just talk? And to answer that question, we must be aware of the fact that EU institutions have always seen themselves as agents and promoters of integration and societal change. And societal change and integration is first done by the word. The action follows the word. So the strongest power of the EU institution is the power of wording political problems, wording political desires. So the leadership function of EU institutions is not only reflected in the laws, but also, and I would say in the first line, by the way of wording problems. So the conference results define the strategy of future efforts of the EU institutions to amplify the European integration process. And that is what reflects in the Commission President's State of the Union address of September 2022, when Ursula von der Leyen summed up in her State of the Union address the focal points of this Conference of Europe reform suggestions. So, the meaning of the results. Now, what I said until here are more general remarks. Now we come to the points being reflected by the Commission, first reinforcing democratic change. Well, we could ask, what does democracy mean in an EU context? Because, as we have already heard yesterday, the European Union is not a democracy, at least not in the classical sense of the word, because there is not the one and single European people. Democracy depends on the people and its sovereignty. There are several European peoples, several European nations. So what could democracy mean in that context? The Treaty of the European Union uses the concept of democracy. Article 9 following in Article 2, the values of the European Union are, among others, described by democracy. Well, democracy in that context is not a principle of state organization, but is used to describe a kind of society depending on the will and the interest of the individual. So in that terms, democratic is everything which is useful to individual development, to the development of individual skills and the individual will. Developing a European form of democracy would mean to, in some sort, bypass the democracy on the state level, and the most important instrument to bypass that nation-style democracy is the European Citizens Initiative, because that European Citizen Initiative could link the EU level directly to the citizens of the member states. They can take action and articulate their desires, their wishes directly towards the European institutions. So European democracy will not be strengthened in the first line by stronger parliamentary powers, but by functioning the interest of every individual European citizen, the interest in European development. Then the next thing is, along with strengthening the EU democracy, there will be established new responsibilities of the European Union. And now that refers to the results of the COVID crisis. And here the Commission suggested to strengthen the competence of the European Union in health affairs. Now today, according to Article 168 TFEU, the Union has only a weak power in health affairs. Article 168 reads that the Union complements and encourages and coordinates national health policies, but they don't enforce a common health policy. So why is health policy so important? Because, well, if the EU wants to become a state, or at least something similar to a state, they have to assume one fundamental responsibility, which we attribute to every state, that is the responsibility to protect the life and physical integrity of the own citizens, all people living on the territory of that state. So that is an idea that can be traced back to Thomas Hobbes. That means to the 17th century. Well, political science and also public law science is a very serious matter because it is basically about how to prevent people from killing each other. So, and that means responsibility of the state to protect its citizens. It's in the first line, a responsibility to prevent people from killing each other. And in a second, or in the consequences of that is that the state has to formulate the preconditions of how life and physical integrity of the citizens are to be protected. And the interesting thing is that the existing fundamental rights, we have a Charter on fundamental rights within the European Union, cannot only be interpreted as freedoms of the citizens toward a state authority, but they can also interpret as duties to protect. So we could understand these fundamental rights provisions as duties of the state to protect freedom. In the first instance, to protect life, and in the second instance, and in the following instance, to protect the freedom of every individual. So that is an interesting thing. With that argumentation, fundamental rights could become powers of the state, and from that could become duties of the citizens. I would just one personal remark to sum up these ideas. It is not my task today to give some definite answers to problems which are on the flow. all I can do is to raise some question marks, and maybe we can come to that in the discussion after these panel presentations. So, meaning of the results, part 4, the advancement of fiscal union. Not only healthcare, but also fiscal union is an effort taken by the European Union, even in its present state. And of course, fiscal policy touches not only the core of the finalization debate. We heard yesterday that there is a certain contradiction between the ever closer union on the one hand and the idea of finalité, requiring that this ever closer union comes to an end somewhere. So at the core of that finalization debate is the fiscal policy of the European Union. It is about the question if we should conceptualize the European Union as a common market within an Europe des patries, that is an Europe of the peoples. That is a phrase conceptualized by Charles de Gaulle, former French president, Europe des patries. Or should we see the European Union as a federal political system analogous to the federal state, like the Federal Republic of Germany? And we see that the financing of a political system exactly depicts the distribution of power within the system. So if you look at the financial currents between the state levels, the central state and the states, the state departments and so on, you can have an exact picture of how the power is distributed within the system. And we see today that there is a mixture of revenues. The European Union is financed mainly by resources that are based on the general national income, GNI, and on a surplus on the national value-added tax. These are the main revenues of financing the European Union. But until today, the European Union has not, like the states, the power to finance itself from external funds. That means from taking loans on the financial markets. And, well, we have seen that Article 311 TFEU, that is the norm crucial to that matter, doesn't exclude the raising of credits by the European Union, but it opposes a kind of financing that is at odds with the principle of conferral. That means raising funds mustn't go so far as to establish a budgetary sovereignty of the Union. So now my time is almost over. The German perspective. I will sum up. We don't need PowerPoint slides. I will sum up that. We heard yesterday that the German Constitutional Court requires the German European policy to meet some reservations of the German Constitution. The most important one being the so-called ultra vires reservation. That means German policy, that German parliament, German government, and so on, must respect the limits of our constitution. So they must not give any consent to measures endangering the national sovereignty on budgets and on other central eras of fields of political integration. And, well, I don't have the glass bowl in which I can see the future. But according to the adjudication of our Constitutional Court up to now, we can assume that what is suggested by the EU Commission, the reform steps suggested by the EU Commission, will not meet this ultra vires precondition. Well, but there is another thing which is important. In 2009, the German Constitutional Court stated in the Lisbon adjudication, stated that the now existing treaties and the now existing level of integration is the maximum of what is in accordance to the core principles of our constitution. And that means in practice, the German government has to avoid everything that looks like formal amendment of the treaties in order to achieve a deeper integration level. Yeah? They have to avoid everything, because if they consent and agree with further steps to strengthen integration, that could cause serious problems with our German Constitutional Court. Nobody knows that exactly. Maybe the Constitutional Court will change its mind. But that is why, and you have to understand that is why the German government is pro-integration, but and at the same time opposed to just even talk about amendment of the treaties. So, and everything which follows from that will be subject to the discussion, because my time is over. Thank you.